Welcome back, viewers. We just had a little issue with Mark. I would call it an identity crisis, right, Mark?
That's exactly what it was.
So welcome back to the security stream, everybody, and for the GSC conference. And if you don't know me, I think most of you know me by now. I'm Jamie Pease. I'm the chairman of the security working group. We're just going to get straight on with it. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome back Mark Nelson, who's presented to this stream and other streams on a number of occasions. This is session 1BG, and his title of his session is Resiliency is No Accident. And if you don't know Mark, he's from IBM, from the RACF development team. So Mark, or Jeanette, whatever your name is today, over to you.
Amy, thank you very much. And I do apologize. The technical flaw was on my side. And it's interesting that a session on resiliency actually had a problem in its technical setup, and a problem injected by me. So we learn from these things and we move on. So thank you very much for joining us here today. The topic is resiliency. It's a topic that is, it's kind of a thread going through this entire conference. Mark Wilson talked about the role of the systems programmer in assuring resiliency as an example, and all the things we do to keep our systems as secure as we can, to keep them as operational as we can, all play into the concept of resiliency. And so therefore, resiliency is not an accident. You don't happen upon resiliency. You achieve resiliency because you've done the right amount of proper planning, investment, training, and you know how to execute when things go wrong. So what this session is all about is we're going to look at a very, very well-known non-IT incident that shows, it demonstrates in very real time several key factors on what it takes to be resilient. And what I hope we will do is take these forward and apply them to our IT systems and to our careers. Now, I welcome questions as we're going along. This is really intended to be a bit more of an interactive session than perhaps your somewhat straightforward technical session. So post questions and Jamie will interrupt me as questions arise. It'll be a fun discussion. So that's my thesis, right? Resiliency, you have to work for it. So what is this thing called resiliency? Well, it's the ability to recover and adapt and move on when something bad, usually when something bad happens, when it's some kind of misfortune or some kind of unexpected change. Now, every industry, every business has its own resiliency characteristics. We have different levels of expectations from perhaps the person who delivers our morning paper or the company that delivers our electricity. Right? So different levels of resiliency are required depending upon the type of industry you're in. And some industries are really good at developing resiliency and implementing resilient environments. So can we learn about resilience by looking at other industries? And I believe we absolutely positively can. And one of the industries that I'm very interested in is the aviation industry. And it's an industry that has really done, in my opinion, a fabulous job of improving its resiliency since the industry really began. So we all know the first flight was at the turn of the last century, the Wright brothers, but commercial aviation really came of age in the 30s and 40s. Well, if you looked at the accident and fatality rate back in, let's say, the 40s and compared it to now and adjusted it for the amount of flying that's done now versus was done then, the accident rate would be horrifying in the sense, and the number that I heard from one security professional once talking about this was if we had the accident rate of the 40s and applied it to the current volume of aviation, it would be the equivalent of 2 fully loaded 747s dropping out of the sky every week. Right? We would never accept that kind of risk associated with travel. And the aviation industry responded by driving defects, if you will, by driving operational errors, by driving accidents out of the system. And this chart here shows what happened since roughly the very late 50s, all the way through a few years ago. And I just want to point out that the top part of that graph is in fact non-linear, right? All right, so this is an exponential decline. So I think we can learn a lot from our brethren in the aviation industry. Now, I'm rather interested in aviation safety for a couple of different reasons. As Jamie said, I'm in the RACF organization. I've actually been a RACF developer since 1987. I took a temporary 6-month assignment in RACF and liked it so much I've stuck around for 34 years. but I've actually been a pilot longer than that. I took my first flight lesson in 1985. So I am extremely interested in aviation safety. I am a relatively low time pilot. I've got about 550 total time hours. I'm a private pilot, which means you can't pay me to fly somewhere. I can't engage in commercial operations. A single engine aircraft, only a land-based aircraft. I study the aviation because I've got a very, very personal reason that I want to be a safe pilot as I possibly can, and that is my family. Right? I love flying with my family, and I want us to survive our flights unscathed. And when I fly by myself or with other folks, I want to make sure that I'm there to come back to my family, right? So I spend a lot of time looking at aviation safety. I actually probably spend more, probably 2 to 3 times as much time studying about aviation safety than I actually do with my hands on the controls of my aircraft. So that's my Cessna 172 that I share with 60 of my closest friends in a flying club, Cessna 4538 Echo, 180 horsepower, 4-seat Cessna aircraft, 1976, a great aircraft. And it's just so much fun being able to have the joy of flight, but I want to do it safely. So I study aviation safety, and it dawned on me very early that there are a lot of lessons to be learned. And in fact, that's exactly what this session is about. What lessons can we learn? And we're going to do it with a case study. We're going to be looking at a particular incident, and it's the story of Cactus 1549. You may not know it by that name. You might remember it by a different name, the Miracle on the Hudson. So this was a U.S. air flight, Flight 1545. Commonly called Cactus. You'll hear that word a lot in what we'll be going through in a few moments. Why Cactus? Well, the FAA likes to give, when the FAA air traffic control folks are talking to an aircraft, they'll prefix their conversation, American Airlines or AA231, and then they'll give some communication. Well, at the time, there were a lot of airlines that had the word West in their name, and US Air doesn't have West, but it actually came from an airline called America West. So we had America West, Southwest, Northwest, SkyWest, and the FAA said, hey, America West, we'd like you to come up with a label for yourself, right? So they polled their employees and they came up with the word Cactus. Made perfect sense. America West, and they were based in Arizona, and there were a lot of cactuses in Arizona. So that was actually their sort of their logo, and Cactus was a perfectly valid call sign until a few years ago when United Air was absorbed by American Airlines, and then the Cactus call sign went away. Anyway, a couple of words about where Cactus came from. The aircraft itself was an Airbus A320. Tail number November 106 US. I give you that so you can actually look online and get the accident reports. It departed from LaGuardia Airport. LaGuardia Airport is an airport that's very close to downtown Manhattan. So it's the closest there. It's one of the easiest to get to from downtown Manhattan. But it is kind of landlocked, and the runways are known as being a little bit shorter than pilots tend to have at other airports like Newark or JFK. It's a 7,000-foot runway, 150-foot wide. They were departing there, going out to Charlotte International Airport about 3:30 in the afternoon on a chilly January day in 2009. That was a great day for flying. The winds were from 340 at about 13 knots. Visibility was 10 miles. The ceiling was 3,500 foot, so the clouds were 3,500 feet above the ground. They were broken, so that's what constitutes a ceiling. The altimeter was 3023. High pressure was in control. That's usually considered pretty good flying weather. Now, 2 minutes and 15 seconds into that flight, they encounter a flock of geese. The engines ingest the geese, and the engines cease to develop thrust. The engines are no longer providing power to keep that aircraft aloft. 5 minutes and 50 seconds later, 5 minutes and 50 seconds into the flight, so about 3 minutes later, the aircraft lands in the Hudson River right next to Midtown Manhattan. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at that flight. And to look at that flight, we really want to first look at the characters in that flight, because this really is a story. If you were writing this story from scratch, you'd be hard pressed to come up with a better story. Captain Sully Sullenberger, 57 years old, a military pilot, graduated from the U.S. Air Force Academy as the outstanding cadet in airmanship. He was a commercial pilot after his military career ended from 1980 to about a year after this incident. Highly experienced, 20,000, almost 20,000 hours total flight time, almost 9,000 hours as pilot in command. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. He had a lot of experience of that particular type of aircraft, the A320, 4765 hours of pilot in command of that. And he had a clean record, no enforcement, retest history. Sitting at his right side was Jeff Skiles, a little bit younger, did not come through the military, came through the civilian side of aviation. Both of his parents were pilots. He began flying at age 15. And he was flying as a first officer on that particular flight because, well, this was 2009. We had an economic slowdown in 2008. People weren't flying much. He had been flying in the left seat as a captain, but he took a position as a first officer on flights simply so he could actually keep flying. Also highly experienced, with a little bit of a different twist on his experience. He had a little bit over 15,000 total flight hours, a lot of time, almost 9,000 hours a second of command. He wasn't particularly experienced in the A320. That's not unusual to pair a very experienced pilot with one of lesser experience for the purpose of cross-training, right? But that's not to say that he wasn't experienced. He knew how to handle emergencies. He had been through the exact same training as had all of the pilots who were flying that aircraft. He was perfectly competent, capable, actually more than that for that flight, also had a clean record. And when you're talking about the flight crew, we cannot forget a couple of other folks. The first are the flight attendants. And I know we often think of these are the folks who bring us pillows and blankets. Oh, wait, they don't do that anymore. These are the folks who are there to serve and just keep us comfortable. But their most important and their primary job role is flight safety, to keep you safe, especially if something bad happens. We all know something bad and sort of something good happened in this one. Donna Dent-Shilladale and Doreen Welsh, they had almost a century worth of experience aggregated together. They had to deal with the panic that was going on in the cabin as this was going on. So they had panicking passengers both before and after the actual landing. And they were so focused on executing their duties of keeping folks focused during that descent and during the actual, I will say, impact with the water, that they had no idea that they'd actually landed on water until they looked out the window and saw, hey, wait a second, that's not land. So a very, very accomplished crew. And you could have had a better crew for this particular incident. One other character that plays in our story, a gentleman by the name of Patrick Harton. He was an air traffic control specialist. He was the person to whom Cactus 1549 was talking and communicating with. And he in turn was then relaying information to other air traffic controllers, as well as emergency responders. Now, 10 years of experience. He had worked a number of emergencies in the past. And interestingly, he'd actually been a controller in one of the adjacent sectors. It was one of the sectors that he needed to coordinate with when they were looking at options of possibly landing at Teterboro in New Jersey. So those are the players in this story. A couple of key background concepts to understand. The first one is that commercial aviation operations are among the most regulated operations in any industry. Standardization is the norm, and we're going to focus on a couple of elements of that. The first one is communication and terminology. Words matter, and words have very precise meanings. The second one is operational procedures. What do you do when things are going well? What do you do when things are not going well? And the third thing we'll talk about is CRM. Crew resource management. It's developed in the late 80s and has been, I think, instrumental in keeping our airlines and our aviation operations as safe as they possibly can be. Crew resource management. Now, standardization. Inside the aircraft, training and certification. In order to be piloting that aircraft, they have to have a certain set of licenses and certifications. They have to be air transport rated pilots, must have instrument ratings. There's a whole bunch of standardization, a bunch of education that needs to occur, training that needs to occur, retraining that needs to occur. These gentlemen don't just earn the certificate and then just fly with that certificate. They are constantly retraining, some airlines every 6 months or so. And this retraining is rigorous. They'll go in and simulate engine failures, tire failures, radio failures, whatever it might be. So standardization in training and in certification. The license you get from your country is cross-honored in other countries. The location of instruments within the aircraft, all right? So there's something called the attitude indicator, the artificial horizon. And around that, you'll see a set of instruments that will always be in the exact same position. So when you move from one type of aircraft to another type of aircraft, you don't have to wonder where things are. This is true even when you move on to electronic flight displays, where they often take information from multiple instruments and put it into a single LCD style display. The information you'll see on that display, standardized. Chart formats and notations. You'll see on the control yokes here, these pilots have some sheets of paper. One of them has, the gentleman on the left has the approach plate that shows the exact path that they will take into that particular runway at that particular airport. The other thing you'll see is checklists. Checklists are detailed lists of operations that must be performed in a particular order. The aviation industry created the concept of checklists in the 40s. They had a military flight with an extremely experienced crew that took off, and they forgot to prepare the aircraft correctly. It was just an oversight. There were fatalities, and from this generated the concept of the checklist, which will list, again, things you need to do in the order in which you need to do it. So that's all the standardization you'll see. Standardization with air traffic control, the time and manner, as well as the vocabulary used, all standardized. Outside the aircraft, the airspace definition. If I talk about class Bravo airspace, that means the same thing anywhere in the world. That standardization occurred back in the 90s. Obstacle clearance rules, how close can you come to obstacles? Runway and taxiway markings and signage, those are standardized. I actually just had a run-in with this 2 nights ago. I went flying out of my local airport, and to make the runway, the taxiway standard, they renamed a whole bunch of them. So now I had to take out the current plate and understand that taxiway Bravo is now taxiway Bravo 3. But all of that is to aim to have standardized airports so that no matter where you're flying into, things will look the same. Maintenance, that's also another area, a very important area for aircraft. The little Cessna that I fly, once a year, required by law, has to go in for a full annual inspection, which starts at about $6,000 US, and that's assuming nothing is wrong. We have other maintenance that has to occur every 100 hours of use, all required by the rules and regulations, all created because to prevent incidents because of mechanical issues. There are lots of others. There's a link down there if you want to pursue that. Now, like any flight, the control of Cactus 1549 goes through several phases of air traffic control. They develop their flight plan, they file their flight plan, then they'll contact clearance delivery. They'll get a transponder code, right? That's before they've left the gate. Next person they'll talk to is ground control. They take them from what's called the non-movement area or the gate and brings them up to the runway departure threshold, right? At that point, they start talking to the tower. They get their takeoff clearance. They depart, and fairly quickly after that, they'll be handed off to departure control. That will take them up to a certain altitude. Then they'll move on to an en route center, and then they'll go from en route center to en route center to en route center. Then the process reverses. You talk to approach control, the exact inverse of departure control. Then you talk to the tower, then you talk to the ground, and now you're back at the gate at your city of arrival. Now, the communication transfer occurs at specific points in the flight, such as you come up to the runway threshold and you're ready for departure, or when you're directed. So the tower will tell you after a certain amount of time, contact departure control. You switch the radios, you identify yourself, and you're now under the control of that particular part of the air traffic control system. We will see that happen. We'll take the issue that happened here with Cactus 1549 happened during departure control phase of the flight. There is a concept in aviation. It's truly unique. It's the concept of pilot in command. It's a very, very serious responsibility, but it gives the pilot very, very serious power. And what that is, the pilot in command is the sole and final authority as to the safe operation of that aircraft. That's the person who gets to make the decisions, right? So that's an awesome responsibility. What it comes with is an awesome power. And that power is specified in FAR 91.3 subsection B, which says that in an in-flight emergency requiring immediate action, The pilot in command can deviate from any rule whatsoever, right? I won't say the rules don't apply, but he or she can make the decision to violate a rule, and that's perfectly fine if it's meant to address the emergency that needs to be addressed, right? That's an awesome responsibility. That's an awesome power. And the only thing that you have to do when that occurs is, well, each pilot in command who deviates from a rule under this section, upon the request of the administrator, send a written report of the deviation. So you can take this life-saving action, and all that's going to be required is possibly a small amount of paperwork. That to me is truly unique. I don't think I've seen that in any other industry. Pilot in command. Now, the way the session is going to go on, we have 8 minutes of video to watch. Here's what the simulation display looks like. Here's what the video has. This is sort of the main display. You'll see different variants of this as we go along. We call that main area, let's call it the main view area. And up in the upper right, there's the timestamp in GMT time, or as you would call it, time. It's 5 hours off for those of us who are here in the US. The next thing here is the airspeed, the altimeter. This says how high is the aircraft off mean sea level. So LaGuardia Airport, I think, has an elevation of about 23 feet. That guy there looks like it's 0. It's actually saying just a little bit higher than 0, about 20, 23 feet. The next gauge that's there is the airspeed indicator. This shows the speed of the aircraft through the air mass. It's not the speed over the ground, it's through the air mass. That gives it the airspeed. There are 3 communication blocks shown. The top one, sort of a little bit white, says KLGA Tower. That is where you'll be seeing the communications with whoever in air traffic control they're talking to at the time. KLGA is LaGuardia Airport. A little later on, you'll see departure. The bottom 2 blocks, they're a little one in blue and slightly yellow. This is transcript information. This is from the cockpit voice recorder. You don't hear these things unless they happen to be talking to air traffic control, in which case you'll hear as well as see. But this is the communications that Captain Sullenberger and First Officer Skiles are doing as they're flying, as they're trying to remediate this issue. CVRs, cockpit voice recorders, give great insights into what pilots were thinking when they were trying to address a particular situation. The other thing you'll see is the bottom part there. That's just another view. Sometimes it's a view out the side. Sometimes it's a lateral view. Makes sense. All right. I've divided the video up into 3 pieces. The first piece is the departure and climb out piece. Now, a couple of things I want to point out, and we'll talk about these in a little more detail later on, but some basics about this. First Officer Skiles was the pilot flying. Right? He's not the pilot in command. He is the pilot flying. Captain Sullenberger, we used to call it the pilot not flying. Now it's called the pilot monitoring. And that's the idea. You have one person doing and the other person watching to make sure that what is being done is the correct thing to be done. Now notice the structure. Notice the coordination. Notice the focus. Notice how singularly focused they are on the actions going on in this flight. You're going to hear a couple of words in here. TOGA. TOGA means set the flight management system to take off and go around mode. I talked earlier about the different phases of flight. You'll hear contact near departure that says, hey, it's time to go and talk to these other folks. And this whole video starts at the point at which Cactus 1549 has been cleared for takeoff. This is a video. If we have any kind of problems with it, the links to the video are at the end, but let's let it go. Are you hearing audio?
No,
Jamie?
I think, Mark, you might have not ticked to your share sound.
All right. Do you remember where share sound is?
Yeah, so if you, I think if you go to the sharing button.
Got it. All right. I've enabled share sound.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Because without the sound, this is just pretty pictures of aircraft.
Go up to 528. You can exit Sierra, ground point 7.
Can you hear it now?
0.7528.
Cactus 1549, runway 4, cliff takeoff.
Cactus 1549, sir.
49. Eagle 4718, LaGuardia, runway 4, position, hold traffic to land 31.
Position, runway 4, Eagle flight 4718.
Piedmont 4203, clear to land 31, and 36012, traffic hold on 4.
Clear to land 31, Piedmont 4203.
One of the things that always impresses me is how you'll get bursts of air traffic control information, and you do learn very quickly how to filter out what's not related to you and what is related to you. But you can see they've started the takeoff roll, right? There's not much communication going between Sullenberger and Skiles. In a few moments, you'll see a word. V1, rotate. That's this. They've achieved the speed at which the takeoff will not be aborted, right? The confirmation, positive rate, that says that they are in fact climbing as they'd expect to be doing.
Cactus 1549, contact new departure connect.
Good day.
And there's our switch.
Cactus 1549, 700, climbing 5,000.
Cactus 1549, new departure to contact, climb, maintain 15,000.
Maintain 15,000, Cactus 1549.
Flaps 1, that's retracting flaps. It is unusual in this airspace to have this kind of silence, or this period of silence. What a view of the Hudson. Interesting comment.
Every day.
Here, Johnny 2760 is 5,000, turning your right to 150.
Joining 2760, climb, maintain 10,000.
And there you have it. The word birds. What happened at this point is Captain Sullenberger saw about a couple of 100 yards away a flock of birds, and he knew that they were about to impact the aircraft. So let's talk about what we've seen up to this point in the first 2+ minutes. This was, in Sullenberger's own words, a completely unremarkable flight, right? There was nothing unusual about this. Right now, the fact that there's nothing unusual about this, I think we can learn a lot from. This shows the discipline of these folks. Notice the flight deck discipline. There's complete focus on the flight. There is no conversation whatsoever in this portion that is unrelated to the flight itself. That's actually a requirement of these types of operations. We call this the sterile cockpit. You don't sit there and talk about sports scores or family issues or favorite movies. You're focusing specifically on the flight. Now, interestingly, there's sort of one little deviation and that's where Sullenberger says, "Ooh, nice view up the Hudson." And Skiles replies, "Yeah, think about it. If you were writing this as a story, if you were scripting this out as a piece of fiction, that is the ultimate piece of foreshadowing, right? But it happened, you know, facts are sometimes even better than fiction." Note the use of checklists. These guys have 25,000 hours of experience between the two of them, and still they're referring to pieces of paper to make sure that they get everything done that they need to get done in the order it needs to be done. Notice how they are coordinating with each other. Notice how they call out key things. V1, that's the speed, as I mentioned earlier, at which you're committed to the takeoff. Prior to that, if something happens, your recovery is completely different. You're stopping the aircraft on the runway. Once you've achieved V1, your recovery processes are now completely different because you are committed to that departure. The rotate speed, one person says it, the other person pulls back on the control yoke, and the aircraft begins its climb. The expectation is that you'll have a positive rate of climb. Notice how one pilot confirms to the other, yes, we are seeing the expected reaction from the thing that we just did. And notice how they share the responsibilities. Gear up, please, gear up. So they are working as a team. That's crew resource management. All right, let's look at part 2, the second part of this. We're going to take this from the word birds, right? The anticipation of having an impact all the way through getting to the point where they're committed to going into the Hudson. So a few things I'm going to point about this guy. First Officer Skiles is flying. The impact occurs. And very quickly, you want to transition the responsibility in actual flying. The responsibility is always Captain Sullenberger's, but Captain Sullenberger, knowing that he was more experienced in the aircraft, wanted to assume control of the aircraft. That process of transferring control, it's done with just each pilot saying 2 words, right? You'll see them in there. My airplane, from Captain Sullenberger, says, I will now take control. And then the acknowledgement, your airplane, from First Officer Skiles. Notice how quickly, how it's done. It's seamless. They'll talk about something called the QRH, the Quick Reference Handbook. Pilots are trained that when something happens, right, there are certain aspects of your response that are memorized, that are muscle memory, if you will. Right. So in my aircraft, if the engine fails, I know to lower the nose and go to the best glide speed of 65 knots. Right. After that, you get the checklist to take you through all of the things to help diagnose and hopefully fix that process. In these kinds of operations, they call it the QRH, the Quick Reference Handbook. You'll notice in a few moments that they sometimes got confused about the name. It's Cactus 1549, Cactus 1539, Cactus 1529. It didn't matter. Right? Nobody was focusing on the things which were completely immaterial. Look at how much information is coming into the flight deck to help them handle what's going on. Look at how they prioritize the tasks that they needed to do. We'll talk a little bit later about aviate, navigate, communicate. And then there are words in aviation that are just so important. The word unable. When air traffic control tells you to do something and you can't do it for some reason, it's an unsafe, you don't have to explain, you simply say unable, and air traffic control will come up with an alternative for you, and you'll hear that directive and either accept it or say unable. But you don't have the explanation as why, you simply say can't do it. And it's understood as pilot in command, that's your call, and air traffic control will react to the call that the pilot in command has made. So we're going to take this from the point at which birds are said, and we'll take it down to the commitment to go into the Hudson, a little bit over 2 minutes.
In 10,000.
10,000, Johnny 2760.
Now notice how much activity is going on the flight deck. My aircraft, your aircraft, we've had the transition of control.
Cactus 15.9, turn left heading 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds. We've lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures. Got emergency returning.
Who is it?
It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529. Which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines. He said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529. If we can get it for you, do you want to try to land 1013?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Johnny 2760. Turn left 070.
070, Johnny 2760.
Hi, Cactus 15.9. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Cactus 15.9. Runway 4 is available if you want to make left traffic to runway 4.
I'm not sure we can make any runway. What's over to our right? Anything in New Jersey, maybe Teterboro?
Okay, yeah, off your right side is Teterboro Airport. Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire, actually LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, go ahead.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to your airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
We're gonna be in the Hudson. I still get chills when I hear that phrase, and I'll tell you, as I'm watching the video, I check my pulse, and it always goes up way higher than normal, even though I've watched this video probably 50 or 60 times. But I hope you saw the transition of control. My aircraft, your aircraft. Notify the use of checklists. Even while they're going through this, the first thing they do is pull out the checklist, and they're going through the restart process. They're going through the diagnostics process. Notice how much they focused on this concept of aviate first, then navigate, and then communicate. It's 25 seconds between the time in which they say the word birds and have the impact until you hear the words Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And I noticed they only said that when they were given a directive from ATC, and their response was Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Those 3 words in that order really change how you're being handled by air traffic control. Once you say that, once you've declared an emergency, the full of power and experience of air traffic control is now at your disposal. The ATC team is dedicated to doing whatever they can to give you a safe conclusion for the flight. So notice how they kept providing options. Do you want to try Teterboro? Do you want to try, runway 4, runway 13? What would you like to do? What do you need to land? I love that phrase. They are looking to the folks who are closest to the situation to get real-time diagnostic information so they can assist in bringing the flight to a safe conclusion. Notice how as soon as the issue happens, hold your departures. We've got a guy coming back. He's got priority. So now the rest of the ATC folks know to divert things around. Notice how he gives them an option to go into Teterboro. And once they didn't go there, of course, but once it was identified as a possibility, he's on the phone to Teterboro saying, I've got an inbound emergency. What runway 1? Great. The coordination here is seamless. And then notice at the end, this is the captain, brace for impact. Sullenberger talks about, he chose those words very, very carefully. The word brace has a very specific meaning. It instructs the flight attendants in the cabin to take a whole set of actions to secure the aircraft and prepare the aircraft for impact. Right, so they'll start yelling, heads down, all that kind of stuff. The words are important. The words have been predefined, if you will, and everybody knows what they mean. There was a session yesterday, the SecOps session, lunchtime session, where the speaker, Edward Shim, talked about the need to be able to communicate in a common language. Aviation has done a very good job with doing that. So now, where are we? Well, Sullenberger has said those famous words, we're going to be in the Hudson. The next section is about 1 minute and 15 seconds. It takes us from that point until our actual splashdown time in the Hudson River. Now, notice how the crew continues to work the problem to restart the engine. They really didn't know the impact of the amount of damage that had been done to the engines. And in fact, at one point, they were getting indications that I think it was the left engine was starting to spool up. So in hindsight, information is perfect. But remember, when you're in the middle of the battle, when you're in the middle of the situation, you're getting information that you have to be able to evaluate and figure out, am I seeing the real information or am I being misled by something else? So they had to deal with that. Notice how air traffic control is continuing to provide options. Hey, you've got Newark off at this 7 miles away. Do you want to go there? Now, Sullenberger has to be taking in all of this information and still at the same time managing the altitude, the airspeed, and most importantly, the vertical descent. Because what he needs to do is he needs to minimize the G-forces, the deceleration that will occur when you impact with the ground or the water in this case. So you want to have a minimum vertical descent, and a minimum forward velocity, right? That reduces the G factors because you want this to be a survivable impact. You'll hear the phrase radar contact loss from air traffic control. That's an indication that says the aircraft is now too low for them to get a reliable radar return. And then there's a phrase in there, got any ideas, which we'll talk about after the video. So let's take it up for the last 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280. You can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? All right. Kelly 2760, contact New York 126.8.
26.8, Joey 27.6.
Cactus 1549, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, turn left thing 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, you still on? Cactus 1529. If you can, you got runway 29 available at Newark. Will be 2 o'clock in 7 miles. You can fly 4718, climb maintain 12000.
Okay, 1000 and you can 5 at 288.
And you can fly 4718. I'm sorry, I missed that. Say again.
And we're up to 12,000, 280 ahead.
Okay, thank you. You can fly 4718, turn left 220.
I still get chills watching that. So one of the things you see in there, First Officer Skiles, on his own, decided he's going to give altitude and airspeed callouts to Captain Sullenberger, so Captain Sullenberger can focus his visual field on what's going outside the aircraft. That helped Sullenberger manage that final descent. That was a great choice, and that's the kind of thing you get when you have two folks who are very, very experienced. Again, was it 35 hours worth of experience in that cockpit. There was a discussion there about what flaps to use to get the minimum vertical descent, the slowest nose up configuration, for the point of contact with the water. They were kind of inventing some of this process as they were going along. Now, I mentioned radar contact loss. When the aircraft goes below a certain altitude, they don't get, the air traffic control doesn't get the radar returns, and that happened. But as they were trying to, as Sullenberger was managing the descent, he had to lose airspeed. And the way you lose airspeed when you have no power is you raise the nose, right? That decreases your airspeed, increases your angle of attack, increases lift, right? So the aircraft climbs about 200 feet. Well, when it climbed up that 200 feet, ATC started getting radar returns. Now, Patrick Harton, in an interview that he gave after the incident, was talking that about how radar contact is lost, and at that point, he doesn't know anything about what's happening to the aircraft. In fact, he didn't know that the aircraft had landed on the Hudson and everybody had survived until several hours after that, after the incident. And the reason is when you have an incident like this, the controller is relieved of their duty position and then they're, I wouldn't say put in isolation, but they're removed from the situation so they can start the data collection. So they don't have any memories sullied by conversations that might have happened. But it was hours later when he found out that in fact everyone had survived, and he talked about radar contact loss at that point, just how it affected him at a gut level. So radar contact loss, it comes back, so he starts giving him more options. Newark, 7 miles, thinking that they might have attempted a restart, but they hadn't. And again, the last thing you hear from Sullenberger is we're going to be in the Hudson, right? So there's no further contact at that point. And yet all of this actions are occurring. All these actions are occurring in the background, scrambling to get emergency services started and things like that. The system works remarkably well. One of the phrases that I see in here, and I smile a little bit, it's the got any ideas. And this is not the plain, the statement of someone says, listen, I don't know what to do. It's CRM, it's crew resource management. It's like, all right, let's talk to anybody who could possibly help. You have any ideas whatsoever that we can use and maybe develop and incorporate into a plan of execution. So don't take got any ideas as some kind of, well, we're just gonna let the fates come. No, it's CRM. It's let's see if we can continue to work the problem. That phrase made famous in Apollo 13. Can we work the problem to have a successful outcome? Now, one thing I want to mention is that A320 aircraft, right, that's a fly-by-wire system. And there is automation in that aircraft that will override pilot's inputs. If the pilot attempts to fly it outside of the designed flight envelope, the aircraft will say, nope, you're asking me to do too much nose up. Nope, I'm going to do less than that. This was very controversial when it came out in the, I guess it'd be the early 80s into commercial airlines. And pilots really were split. No, I want to be able to do whatever I can with the aircraft because I know the aircraft better than, that software might know the aircraft. But we have here an example where the flight management system for a few seconds during that final descent, final contact with the water, was actually changing Sullenberger's or overriding Sullenberger's control inputs to help achieve a lower vertical descent. So I point that out because in a situation where you've got lots of information coming in and where you have to make decisions, you need to have automation. And there are lots of parallels in IT about how you automate, what you collect, a whole bunch of sessions here. But that concept of automating what you can to assist the decision maker in taking the right course of action is absolutely a message that applies in both industries. So They've made contact with the water, right? The aircraft has stopped. Everyone has survived, but it's not over until it's over, right? Couple of things to realize. As I said, it was a January day. It was 41 degrees, which is actually in New York a very pleasant January day, right? On the other hand, the water was 19 degrees. If you immerse your body in 19-degree water, your survival time is probably 15 minutes, right? So you had to keep people dry, and you had to get them to a place where they would continue to be dry. So this particular landing in the Hudson River, it's right between New York and New Jersey. There are lots of ferry services which operate. The New York Waterways Company in particular, NYPD has a marine unit, the New York Fire Department has a marine unit. They were all able to respond to this. 7 ferries, 2 small lifeboats, and 1 FDNY boat were there within minutes to help evacuate folks. And there's that famous photo, folks standing on the wing. A couple of folks actually ended up in the water. We'll talk about one of the incidents in a moment, but that was, just absolutely positively remarkable. Now, a couple of things about the evacuation. The aircraft is tail low, and the back of the aircraft is filling with water. So if you saw the movie, that was absolutely true. Captain Sullenberger was the last person to go down through there and come back out, make sure that everybody had been evacuated. Everybody had to evacuate through the front doors. The slide on the left side of the aircraft, the row 1L slide, they had to deploy it manually. All right, but it took time to deploy, and some passengers just started jumping into the water. So now you have the issue of, all right, I've got the slide deployed. It's now a flotation device. We now have to get people out of the water and bring them in, and passengers were doing that for each other. It was a cold day. Not everybody flies with foot equipment that is good for standing on a wet wing. The wings themselves are curved, so some people actually fell in the water and had to be retrieved out that way. On the right side, the slide deployed as it was expected to do, but the door was flapping open and there was a little bit of wind. So what they did, nice field decision. They got a passenger and said, your job, keep that door from opening, smacking into it, and puncturing it. That would have been bad. So whenever there's an aviation incident, accident, or a near incident or accident, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, gets involved and does an investigation whose sole purpose is to identify what could be done to make sure this doesn't happen again. So the first thing they said was, this airplane was not scheduled to fly over water, so it was not legally required to have flotation devices and all that kind of stuff, the slides in particular. So their recommendation is, whether you're going over water or not, there's a chance that you might have to execute a ditching, as it's called, or a water landing. All aircraft should have the rafts. They wanted to redesign the vest locations to make the vests easier to retrieve. And by the way, if you're ever flying commercially, as I'm sure we all have done, take out that safety briefing card when the flight attendant is going through it and follow along. I've got 500,000 miles with American Airlines and 550 hours flying myself. I still do that. And people who I respect as pilots, very experienced pilots, do the same thing. They also wanted to change the location of those life rafts to make sure that they would be more likely to survive a very rough ditching. They wanted to implement a quick release mechanism on those rafts, on those slides, because they become de facto rafts. Most importantly, they wanted to require low altitude dual engine failure checklist and pilot training. Wasn't considered something that was likely to happen, so it wasn't a focus item. That was one of the recommendations. But just like in other industries, just like in our industry, the auditor says you should do A, B, and C. And the folks who are the operational folks say, no, it's too expensive, or no, we have compensatory controls that are just as good. So that's another lesson, that every industry has folks who say this is what should be done, and other folks who say, no, that's too expensive, and it puts us at the wrong price point. So a couple of final thoughts on this whole resiliency discussion. I think the parallels between the aviation industry and the information industry, they abound, right? There are just so many parallels. The first thing is, both of them are technology-based industries, but both have a very high reliance on people as a part of that process, and the complex interactions between people, or among people, I should say, and between the technology itself. So on the flight deck, all of that flight information that's being presented, the mechanics of flying, that to me is as complex as or complicated or as intrinsically interesting perhaps as being a systems programmer. Now, both IT and aviation, you've got to be well educated, well trained, and that training must be ongoing and must be refreshing. Aviation, it is very, very regimented. Commercial aviation, as I said, every 6 months, these guys are going to simulators and simulating things that will happen. I don't think we have the same level of training, education, and that kind of thing in IT. Mark Wilson talked about this in his systems programmer session and talking about the need to actually test your DR plan. Right. And I do know there are some financial institutions who have a site and a DR site, and they actually swap. For this time period, here's where we're working. Now we're going to swap to the DR site. I'm actually going to run there for some period of time, and then we're going to swap back. That's the kind of training testing that needs to occur. Now, both industries, aviation and IT, you're constantly evaluating trade-offs in an environment that's constantly changing. Aviation is a little bit better about not bringing in new technologies as quickly as perhaps in the IT industry, where sometimes I think it goes from the guys working in the garage into our production systems in a matter of months. In the aviation industries, there's a much more rigorous testing, validation process that needs to occur. And I'm not going to say it's perfect, right? We've seen the incident, a couple of incidents in the last few years where folks took some optimization, shall we say, and they did not work out the way that anyone had hoped. But for the most part, the system works. That technology is validated and verified before it's introduced in aviation, and I don't see the same rigor in information technology. The other commonality, success is often dictated by the ability of the folks who are players in the systems to interact clearly and to leverage each other's expertise. That's the lesson of crew resource management. Prior to CRM, the pilot in command made all the decisions and nobody questioned him. And there were a series of incidents. There was a famous one, the Avianca incident in the 80s, where the first officer realized they were running out of fuel and was attempting to quietly bring it to the attention of the pilot in command, and it didn't happen, and a crash and fatalities occurred. So CRM, working together, key part of that. More final thoughts. Everyone talks the same language. Preparation is key, and those initial responses, right? When the engine fails and I'm flying my Cessna 172, lower the nose, best glide speed, get the checklist. But those initial responses are memorized, muscle memory. There's complete focus on the problem at hand. No side discussions, because you have to handle lots of information coming in. Multitasking is a myth. I quote this because Sullenberger used this, but in hindsight, I'm thinking that he's playing down one aspect of multitasking. As he's flying the aircraft, the muscle memory, his experience is allowing him to manage the airspeed, the vertical descent, and all those things, while his higher level mental processes are working on all the other stuff, right? So the aspect of multitasking is you can't focus your attention on more than one thing, but if you're properly trained, experienced, you can push some of the processes, I'm going to use an old term, into the background while they're still working, and when they need to raise an exception, they will. Notice how multiple teams were taking action. Notice what air traffic control was doing, talking to the other sectors, arranging stuff. There was some work being done with the emergency services folks as well. Sullenberger didn't have to worry about that. All he had to do was hear what they were telling him and process the options they were giving him. Everyone contributes. That's another key thing. And even though everyone's contributing, there's one person in charge. And that's why it's so important to have that concept of the pilot in command. So a couple of references. If you want more information on this, the transcripts of the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder, the link there, the NTSB report, it's a couple of hundred pages. It does require perhaps a little bit of knowledge about the aviation environment, but I think even for a layperson and the ability to Google keywords will be more than enough. It's a fascinating read. More transcript information. Captain Sullenberger did a 12-minute interview where he talked about the incident itself and sort of a minute-by-minute play, well worth watching. The flight attendant's story, link there to their experiences, and that interview that I referenced earlier with Patrick Harton, 10-year anniversary interview, link to that as well. So while you're thinking of questions and posting them in the chat for the minute or two that we have left, I love the fact that GSE supports charities. Please do so. And I welcome your feedback. The feedback helps GSE figure out what sessions you want to hear, helps them decide who to invite, and hopefully they'll invite me back, because if I don't get invited back, then I'm drinking American beer, and I'd much rather be drinking beer with you guys.
Oh, Mark, thank you so much. What a session. And do you know what struck me, and there was some few comments in the chat actually about how calm they were. There's no hysteria there, is there? It's just, we've got a job to do. Let's just, absolute focus, isn't there?
There is, and that always astounded me. That's training. And I got a personal story time here. I had an engine failure in my little Cessna 172. And when you're in an aircraft, if an engine fails, if you've got more than one, it's a relatively routine event. When you have only one, it's a little less routine. But I remember when it failed, I remember the training kicking in. I can literally remember my instructor saying, lower the nose, find a place to land. And fortunately, I was close enough I could turn back to the aircraft. It's training that gets you that calmness. It's the experience of having simulated that engine failure that says, all right, I haven't had it happen for real before, but I've simulated this, and my actions will be based upon you react as you are trained. But yes, their calmness there, especially Patrick Harton's, right? I listen to his voice, and it's all right. I know he's not in the aircraft, but these guys take it personally. Sullenberger, though, you're right. He's just as low key as it gets. You do notice a little bit of an increase in the cadence. Perfectly understandable. Yep.
Absolutely. Any questions or comments from any folks in the audience? Want to ask away?
Oh, somebody mentioned the film. Excellent movie, right? I do have one quibble, and Captain Sullenberger has the same quibble. Every movie, they have to go out and put some kind of dramatic thing in there because you got to have a villain. We got a good guy, we got a great guy. You need a villain. And they turned the NTSB into a villain with this whole you could have turned back subplot. That didn't happen. That just did not happen. They did ask the question, was it an option? And they very quickly said no. And you don't second guess the guy that's flying, especially when he brings it to such a successful conclusion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a great film.
Yeah.
Good point.
Patricia says, do you feel Sullenberg's hobby of flying gliders helped in that muscle memory? It's a hobby that's in common with some other amazing landings pilots in the command doing slips.
Yes. So the question here is, different types of flying, does it help? And I think the person is referring to what's called the Gimli glider. Was one of the first 777s flown by a particular aircraft. It was misfueled because they did the conversion from kilograms into pounds incorrectly, and they ran out of fuel. But the pilot at 35,000 feet, when he ran out of fuel, and they had a fuel indicator, a fuel gauge that wasn't working, which is okay, but then they're supposed to manually stick the tanks, and they manually stick the tanks and did the math wrong. There was some other errors, but he was a glider pilot, so he knew how. Now, pilots know how to fly without the engine on, but as a glider pilot, he knew of a glider landing strip in Gimli, and he aimed for that, and it was being used as a road race area, I think, and he literally landed on this thing that was actually an in-use track, and folks saw the aircraft coming in, and they cleared the way. So yeah, do I think that the glider training helped? I think any training helps, right? Any training helps. So yes, I agree.
I've got one question, and this is around software updates to aircraft. And you did touch on this about all the testing and stuff, but it's like, I guess there must be firmware and software updates to all the instruments and stuff that, and I mean, there was one example when I was at IBM, I was coming to the US for an event, and it was on the new 787, and there was a problem, and the pilot said we have to basically restart all the systems, and I thought, is he doing like a reboot or something? So it's kind of, it's all driven by software, isn't it?
So much is driven by, not on my little Cessna, although we just put an autopilot in, and yeah, there's a lot of software in that too. That's an interesting comment, but I wonder if that was actually just the procedure, or did somebody say, let's just start from a clean slate?
Well, everything went off, air conditioning, absolutely everything. It's just that all lights went off.
Yeah.
And then the plane was fine. I mean, I've heard this been on like a train before. There was Virgin trains. They stopped everything. You could hear the engine go off, the lights. It's like they're doing the software. It's like doing the reboot. It's just a giant computer on here.
Yeah, but somewhere there's somebody doing Control Alt Delete. Interesting, by the way, if you want to get either a laugh or thoroughly terrified, there are people who have posted blue screens of death that they've encountered in different places, and airports are one of them. Now, fortunately, it's only in the display systems, and I did have a situation where somebody in my family was going in for surgery, and I saw a Windows 95 logo on one of the machines, and I raised that as I kind of scared me, and the guy said, "Relax. UIT guys always say this. No, they use that to do some calculations, which are then manually verified and entered manually into the system, which introduces other issues. But at least they were aware of the risk. But yeah, restart. Yeah, I haven't experienced it, but it doesn't surprise me."
Brett says, an absolutely brilliant session. Mark nailed
Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. And no, once again, Mark, it's that this. I mean, this is definitely, this is keynote material for the next conference. I feel.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for all the preparation and for coming to deliver it for us. Absolutely fascinating topic.
Thank you.
So, yes, folks. So this is session 1BG. Like Mark says, please do give feedback. And don't forget our charity. Up now on the agenda, we've actually got a lunch and learn, and so if you want to join that, then you are more than welcome. And then we resume the streams at 2 o'clock this afternoon, at 2 o'clock UK time. We're back here in the security stream at 2 o'clock with Bob Hansel. If you remember, he was on yesterday, so he's going to be talking about RACF monitoring and reporting. So hopefully you can join us for that. Don't forget this session has been recorded as well, and Mark, I think you've uploaded your deck already. Yes, you have. Thank you very much. So yeah, that's it, folks. Enjoy lunch, enjoy the keynote if you're going to join that, and we'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thanks once again, Mark.
Thank you, Jamie.